it would be way too easy to tell a story about John, so I'm going to go for something completely different and tell a story about my mother. My mother passed away a few years ago when she was 93. She was my biggest champion, she was my best friend and harshest critic. We were fortunate to have lives that constantly intertwined with each other, and we shared a million memories. I can't say we never argued, because like all good Irish mothers and daughters, we fought like cats and dogs. Mm-hmm. But we laughed all the time, and there was nobody who would be a fiercer defender of me. We were united against everything. We have a million memories, but I began to think, what if I start to forget? What if age and time make some of these memories fade? So I started to write them down as this collection of stories, and this is one of them. As I was writing these, it dawned on me, they're not just memories, they're life lessons. So this is one of the first life lessons from my mother. Now the cost of living a long life, and I'm sure that Al Jr. and Sr. know this, is the number of medical professionals that have to become part of your life and you have to deal with. Now I was a designated driver and companion for my mother for most of these medical appointments. And out of literally a cast of, it seemed like thousands, her favorite doctor by far was a doctor named Dr. Hope. And one of the things about getting older is you can come up with these inexplicable medical issues, and my mother was no exception. And late, she developed a frontal lobe seizure disorder, which to the alarm of her family manifested itself when she would all of a sudden start talking gibberish. So that was challenging. But she was able to control it with some kind of medication, and Dr. Hope was very kind. And the thing about Dr. Hope was, as a neurologist, he held the key to whether or not she was able to drive. So every 6 months we would go to Mass General Hospital, and she would sit anxiously in the exam room waiting for him to pronounce against all odds that yes, she could continue to drive. Now mind you, those odds not only included the frontal lobe seizure disorder, but a broken hip and a broken everything else when she fell after having her hip replaced, because she couldn't wait 5 minutes for someone else to water the roses for her. So my mother, at this point, was still trying fiercely to be independent. So Dr. Hope was her greatest hope. Dr. Hope would be kind to her and speak to her, and my mother's hearing, which was iffy at best, would suddenly be keen as a bat when she would say, "Dr. Hope," and he would say, "I see no reason that you can't continue to drive," and she would conveniently tune out the rest of that sentence was, "as long as you and your family agree that it's okay." So the drive from my mother's house to Mass General Hospital with Dr. Hope was about a 30-minute straight run, and we've done it a million times before. 2 hours before the appointment, my mother told me we needed to leave to get there on time. I said with strained patience, "Mom, Google Maps says it will only take 25 minutes, it's fine." She was not impressed. I can picture her so clearly. She used to sit in this chair in the kitchen, and she'd have her coat on, she'd have a hat on her head, she was clutching her pocketbook and impatiently tapping her cane. But I just said, "Mom, relax, we're going to get there in plenty of time." Leaving with even more time to spare, we headed out. We were almost there when all of a sudden all the lanes of the Astoria Drive were closed because of a car accident. I was desperately looking at my phone for an alternate route, and my mom would say, "Maybe try this, maybe try that," but I was like, "Mom, I'm going to figure it out. Google Maps will figure it out." So we finally get to the hospital, and we had an excruciatingly slow walk from the parking lot into the elevator and into the office. And on the way, my mother told everyone that would listen, "We're late because my daughter wouldn't leave on time." So we finally got up to the exam room, and a nurse handed my mother an iPad explaining that there was a new check-in procedure and they needed to have the patient answer a series of questions electronically. I went immediately to grab it out of my mother's hand, knowing that she couldn't work this. She shook her head and grabbed it back, and the nurse, sensing discord, said, "Why don't I just ask the questions?" So they asked the usual questions about the level of pain and any medication changes, and then the nurse said, "Are you afraid of anyone in your home?" With the swiftest side-eyed glance in my direction, barest hint of a smile, and a dramatic flair worthy of Olivier, my mother raised her cane and slowly pointed it at me. The nurse looked at me, I looked at the nurse, we both looked at my mother. She sat there like a Cheshire cat, slightly smiling. The poor nurse didn't know what to do until finally my mother smiled and said, I'm not afraid of her. I'm just afraid she won't listen to me. I'm afraid she'll never let me do anything my way anymore. And my heart sank. She was so right. In my fervor to take care of my mother, I was missing such a basic human tenet. Nobody wants someone to do everything for them. They want someone to do some things with them. I had turned her into a checklist of tasks that had to be completed. And in my relentless efficiency, I was sending her a message that she was a burden, not a joy. In trying to make sure she had everything she needed, I made her feel small, and now I felt really small. I tried to say something to my mother, but she just patted my hand. Dr. Hope came into the room, and after he finished his exam, I saw the fear-tinged hope in my mother's eyes, and she said in a determinedly cheerful voice, "So, doctor, you need to tell my daughter I can still drive." Usually, as he answered, I stared at him with my best "don't do it" look. This time, I gave a quick smile and nod. He said, "I see no reason you can't continue to drive." And with that, my mother leaped up, clapped her hands, and said, "Thank you, doctor, we will not bother you anymore." And using her best rapid-fire cane technique, sprinted out the door and down the hall. Later that evening, as I was saying goodnight, after she said, "I love you," she added, "I do know some things you know. I know that if you want to get somewhere on time, you don't stare at a phone, you leave early." Ladies and gentlemen, my mother, the ultimate queen of the mic drop.